As we think about the energy transition, that transition is going to require a massive deployment of new infrastructure. And deploying that infrastructure is going to require a lot of capital. And so I really don't think we can talk about having an energy transition or combating climate change without having finance at the table. When we look at McKinsey and Company, which released a report in 2022 around what it's going to actually cost to finance this energy transition, they found we're going to need about $9 trillion per year all the way out to 2050 in global investment to achieve those goals. That's nearly $275 trillion in total investment. And so the opportunity is massive, but the need is also massive to make sure that we have these capital providers at the table. I think nuclear energy is a necessary investment. So when we look at what the IPCC says about it, which is the climate arm of the United Nations, they identified the need for $100 billion worth of annual investment globally into nuclear if we're going to achieve our goals. And not only is this investment necessary just to achieve our climate goals, it's necessary to make sure that we're on one of the cheapest pathways to achieving our climate goals. So a couple years ago, Vibrant Clean Energy put together a report that identified that if nuclear energy is included in the transmission mix as the U.S. looks to decarbonize, we'll actually save our ratepayers about $500 billion. I think we're at a point where we can't afford to not invest in nuclear energy. We're going to need all types of investments. So when we look at the nuclear supply chain and the opportunities there, we're going to need investments in our existing fleets to keep that carbon-free power flowing. We're going to need investments in our supply chain so we can support the build-out of new reactors. We're going to need investment in the kinds of projects and delivery models that we think are needed to deploy these new nuclear facilities. So it's really across the board. And I think that's going to encompass some of the more traditional investors we've seen in this space, and also entirely new classes of investors who maybe have not been familiar with nuclear in the past, but are getting interested in this growing opportunity. I can honestly say that this is the most interest from Wall Street I've ever seen in nuclear energy. And I think there's a couple factors for that. I think when we look at the growing need of decarbonization and the need for investment in this energy transition, we're increasingly looking at technologies that can deliver, clean, reliable power. And there's really nuclear second to none in that category. And so I think Wall Street's really coming around to that. They're really identifying and realizing that need. And that's driving a lot of interest. But also we're seeing really unprecedented customer demand. So when we think about the large tech firms, we think about industrial sector, all of these sectors are looking for that clean, reliable power today. And so when we combine those two pictures, it really creates this massive opportunity for investment. And so NEI's goal right now has been to improve our relationship with the financial community, because we know that those investment decisions are on the horizon, and we want to make sure that they're ready and prepared when they come available. I think the next step in this process, though, is that we're going to need to move from identifying that this is a really great opportunity and identifying that conceptually it's something that needs to happen. And we need to get to a place where capital is actually flowing to real projects. And we see some examples of that today, but if we're going to meet the 200 gigawatts of new nuclear energy that the Department of Energy says that we need, that's going to have to ramp up massively. And so, I think that relationship that we're developing with Wall Street is only going to grow in the near future. Well, yeah, I mentioned a lot of the interest that's being driven by some of these new customers that are entering the space and the need to combat climate change. So maybe a better way to answer that question is just to talk about some of the changes that we've seen in some of the public discourse around nuclear and around the energy transition. And I think one really great place to start with that is the most recent COP28. For many years, nuclear was excluded from COP. And now in 2023, we had COP28, which was dubbed the nuclear COP. We had a number of countries come together and agree to triple nuclear, and we had just a large interest in how nuclear can help drive decarbonization in countries. And so that really was, I think, a sea change in the conversation. I think we're also seeing this interest manifest in other events as well. NEI hosts a nuclear financing summit every year, and this past year our summit was oversubscribed. We had the most interest we've ever seen, and had standing room the back. So it was really exciting to see that kind of interest that we're hearing in these conversations really come to fruition at an event. And then the last place I'd mention is like the Sarah Week. We saw nuclear just 3 years ago playing a pretty small role in the event, and now we have a lot of programming around nuclear coming up for Sarah Week, and I expect that trend to continue well into the future as well.